A very good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the GenZero Climate Summit 2026. I think the Minister of State has given a very good introductory speech to talk about the importance of breaking down barriers. In fact, I'm reminded as he was talking about the name Ecosperity. We are here in Ecosperity Week. But when we landed on the name Ecosperity for our Temasek Sustainability Conference, it came because we rejected the idea that ecology or protecting the natural and human ecology would be at odds with economic prosperity. The two can come together, and that's the reason why we had the name Ecosperity. We decided to go beyond binaries. So today I'm joined by our panelists here that actually represent very different parts of the value chain and different ways of participating in the climate agenda, from government to representing views about the global south, from thinking about how we aggregate demand to be able to catalyze finance, to thinking about setting standards. So I'm so delighted to have my four panelists here. So maybe let's start by jumping in, and maybe my first question to everybody really is this. So many things have happened over the past few months. If you were to be able to sum up and say, what are some of the most important things that have happened in the past few months, right, that have captured your imagination or captured your attention around the climate agenda, the momentum of change, what would that be? Maybe we start with Damilola.
Okay, thank you, Fred, and thank you so much for inviting me today. I think I always try to think about what is encouraging instead of the doom and gloom of things. What has been really encouraging is just the leadership from the global south. I think you can see, especially in this region, where this region is what will make or break the true energy transition, people haven't gone back on their commitments. If anything, they're doubling down. We also see a lot of kind of conversion between South-South collaboration in a real way on everything from e-mobility to solar power solutions to hydro solutions coming up. So that's really, really encouraging. It's also encouraging that financing is also flowing between regions that weren't likely before. So that is what is really encouraging me, that, look, we all know we're in an energy crisis right now, but the solutions are coming from the global south, and it will continue that way for a number of years.
Well, that's great. So there's a lot more momentum from south-south and not just north-south. Rachel, in your mind, have there been any developments over the past few months that have caught your attention? Are there some of these false choices that are actually confronting us in the climate space recently?
Yeah, well, maybe to pick up where my sister Damilola left off, is that the current energy price spike coming so quickly after 2022 takes away all the plausible deniability that a fossil fuel economy is a stable economy. It just doesn't produce the stability which allows countries to provide the security that they need for their people. And so I think we're seeing country after country after country work out how to pivot more forcefully towards an energy mix which will allow them to guarantee that security for their people. Now, that's not easy to do in the short run. And so there will have to be some grace, I think, from the international community, because a short-term decision to extend the life of a coal plant while you are investing in the infrastructure that will carry green electrons to everybody is a short-term political decision. It doesn't mean that by the time we get into the 2040s, that country isn't going to meet its net zero targets, because the pace of innovation, and as we've seen today, the kinds of investors who are coming in and meeting the need is right there. So I think that what I've seen is countries struggling with new determination to be able to protect their people, protect the planet, achieve everything that we said that we would achieve 10 years ago, but with a level of sort of discipline and dedication which is essential. Now the challenge then is to finance ministers and to others around the world to make sure that the financial system is reading the signals of this conflict correctly and not misreading what this conflict is really all about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Rachel. Julia, how about you?
Well, in the last few months, I've seen a lot of reasons to be optimistic about, even in spite of the uncertainty and geopolitical context that exists in our world today, we see the ingredients for a robust carbon market increasingly coming together. So that means buyers committing, signing long-term agreements that can de-risk projects to unlock the billions of dollars we are going to need for scale, and it means investors coming in to provide that project finance capital. So for example, Symbiosis Coalition announced our second project, Living Carbon, which is a project restoring degraded lands in Appalachia. That was an offtake with 3 companies involved. Following that, 3 weeks later, Octopus Energy Generation announced $500 million of investment to help to scale this project across the United States. Similarly, we saw the announcement recently around the Spec Boom project in South Africa, Imperatives project with investment from Bregal Sphere and Rubicon Carbon, others, and a World Bank outcome bond coming alongside that. So what we're starting to see is this breaking this sort of chicken and egg cycle.
And GenZero.
And GenZero. Oh my goodness, and GenZero. I should have said you first. That's the jet lag. And so what we're seeing is starting to this flywheel is starting to take effect, right? When buyers commit, then investors come alongside that. We can really unlock the scale of impact that's needed, and I expect we'll see more of that in the future as well.
Thanks, Julia. Alex, how about you?
Yes, well, look, firstly, thanks very much for the opportunity to be on the panel, and I think if we keep seeing the energy from yourselves and the Minister, we're really going to see that carbon market take off. I wanted to draw attention to the continuing cascading waves of corporate action that we've seen over the last few months. One of the numbers that we track at the Science Based Targets Initiative is the number of corporate sign-ups, and we've recently crossed the 10,000 company threshold. That's 40% of global market capital is now within a science-based target scheme. When we started the scheme 10 years ago, our ambition was to get to 100, maybe, if we really could. And so we've really turned into something completely different, and that's a testament to corporate ambition. We've asked our members, why is that? You know, what is it that you get? What value is it that you get from the scheme? And what we learned from that was it's much more than a climate instrument. It's a business instrument. Businesses are reporting more than 90% of businesses that they get a positive revenue benefit from being in the scheme, reputational benefits, strategic cohesion from signing up to a clear standard. So it's clear that targets are more than targets, really. They are also a business instrument. And maybe that's one of the binaries that I'd like to put on the table, that
Indeed.
targets.
Could you, Alex, perhaps you could expand on that, because sometimes people see, adhering to science-based approaches, or at least being rigorous and high integrity, as sometimes being at odds with a certain profit motive. Is that necessarily true? Is being high integrity necessarily bad business?
Not today. So I think when we began 10 years ago, it was a more challenging argument to make, but there were segments of the market that were moving forward. Today, these two things are so well aligned that having a clear standard is a way of accelerating your action and making sure that it's strategic and disciplined, and that you can take up the opportunities quickly. So I think the idea that targets and standards are a compliance mechanism doesn't quite appreciate the full benefits. It really is catalyzing on opportunities.
Indeed. So perhaps, Julia, we can pick up on that. Now, you represent some of the biggest buyers, right, in the carbon market. For them, what is their motivation? Why are they participating in the carbon markets? Why do they buy credits? And if you could share a little bit around their purchasing, decision-making framework.
Well, we know that we can't solve climate change alone without decarbonizing as quickly as we can. We need removals in addition to action outside of value chains. And so the companies in symbiosis know they need to decarbonize as quickly as possible, but that removals can be a complement to that, and other outside of value chain action can be a complement to that, to show ambition that goes beyond that internal decarbonization. And acting together collectively in coalitions like the ARC Coalition, like Symbiosis Coalition, can mobilize more finance than acting alone, and that the market really needs a clear demand signal to do that. These companies also realize, and we increasingly see this in the market, that we need both nature and technology, that there are different benefits to these different solutions. Just like there are risks to every investment. There are also different benefits to these projects. And so with nature, that means that's available today, scalable, more cost effective, has all these other critical benefits to society, from climate resilience to biodiversity benefits. And with technology, we know that we're not going to solve this problem with nature alone. We need to be investing today to have those engineered solutions that we're going to need decades from now, and that without clear demand signals, without investment today, those solutions won't materialize. So we really need to take a solutions approach that is a portfolio to achieve as much climate impact as we can when there's a time value to that climate action, and send those critical demand signals today.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Rachel, if we hear what Alex and Julie are saying, it would almost feel as if like there are no headwinds, that the businesses are piling all in on climate. Is that true? And how do you see the landscape evolving over the past few months?
Well, yes. I mean, I think there's numerous truths, so I'm not going to quibble with either one of them. But from a government perspective, I think they both talked about the fact that there has to be demand, right? So we have to grow the demand for high quality, high integrity credits. If we stand back and look at the global sort of promise of climate action, we have to find ways to generate revenue into emerging markets and developing economies, both in order for them to be able to protect their own nature and to manage the natural resources in a sustainable way, because that's going to be their source of resilience as well as their source of economic growth. And we need to be able to get carbon credits into coal retirement and other activities which are going to help them with the transition. And so together with Singapore and Kenya, we've been leading a government coalition to grow carbon markets, and we've got more and more members. And we're working now in partnership with the technical partners that do so much to help countries figure out how to manage compliance markets, Article 6, and the voluntary markets. And we're starting to see, I think, a real uptick in action. And what we need now is the sort of standardization and the rule setting that any mature market would recognize, so the legal treatment of credits, the ability to insure those credits, the ability to be able to have arbitration if something goes wrong. I mean, all of those rules of the road for a recognizable market. People in this room and outside this room are quietly working away, doing the hard work of making a market mature and get to the point where we can actually start to see this realized at scale. So over the next 6 months, there's going to be an enormous amount of pieces falling into place, and I would hope that by the end of this year, the story of the voluntary carbon markets in 2026 will be a vastly much more positive one than was perhaps the case for the last few years. And then in 27, we all have a collective responsibility, which is that these markets have to work for emerging markets, developing economies, and in particular, because the climate sort of show on the road will arrive in Ethiopia in November or December of 2027 for COP32. By then, we will have to have shown that we can make these markets work for Africa.
I think that makes a lot of sense. We will perhaps shift the conversation a little bit around the kind of project types that will actually make sense for real-world impact. And turning to you, Damilola, I know that we have had several conversations around the kind of projects that will actually deliver real-world impact. You are very involved in Mission 300 and thinking about the kind of transformative impact that some of these carbon projects can bring to the lives of ordinary Africans. Could you share with us a little bit around the kind of projects that you see actually deliver the maximum kind of impact, bang for buck, in Africa?
Thank you, and I'm really glad that Rachel mentioned Ethiopia, because if you think about that, that is the one true African COP. And this is where African countries, or we've been working a lot with African countries to come together and almost become price makers instead of price takers in carbon, because the carbon conversation sometimes doesn't look at the development element. Like for Africa in particular to develop at the scale it needs to develop, carbon markets are critical. One of the most practical projects, and I'm glad that the minister mentioned Ghana, because we've been supporting Ghana with like, okay, you have this agreement with Singapore, what does that mean? So companies like Solar Taxi now, some of the e-bicycle chains, there's been about 2 or 3 solar assembly factories that's been set up in Ghana to reduce the need for generating sets. These are practical things, but these are also development agendas that bring economic growth. And I think sometimes when we talk about the carbon markets, we don't talk about the development side of it. And then bringing it to a country like myself, Nigeria, in my state, which I'm embarrassed to say, there are 4.2 million gensets, costing in petrol and diesel alone about $3.4 billion just to service, right? Half of these are under 5 kVA. So there's battery and solar solutions that can be put in place now in a commercial element, but they can only be viable with a carbon credit network. So now we've been working probably for the last 3 years with Gold Standard on the methodology for actually eradicating solar and diesel, petrol and diesel gensets. It didn't happen before because it doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. So everyone talks about coal, but there are these little gensets that you can't really stop from coming in. You can't tell people not to have them because they need electricity. So tying that into what you said earlier, Mission 300, which is an amazing, probably the largest public-private philanthropic partnership the world will see by 2030 to power 300 million Africans in my continent and introduce them to clean energy. You cannot do this in a viable way without the carbon markets, right? So to Rachel's point of view, we have to bring all of this together, but we have to look beyond the credits and think there are people behind these credits. And this is the difference about people living a healthier life.
Indeed, and beyond these black and white conversations that we sometimes have on carbon projects, I know that you are also very passionate about clean cooking solutions in Africa. Now, I know that cook stove projects have been receiving a little bit of a bad rap around the world, but how do some of these clean cooking projects actually impact lives in Africa?
Okay, so first, clean cooking is something that's very sensitive to me because it is the reason every 5th African woman who dies from something is from clean cooking. So using dirty fuels, you have to put it in perspective. Using dirty fuels to feed your family is killing you inside. It's really, really important to note that we're not doing these projects as a nice to have or for corporates just to get credits. It's the difference between life and death for millions of women who look like me, and because they were born in a certain place and because they want to feed their families. Clean cooking projects cannot be viable without carbon credits. So understanding the methodology, understanding how we're going to verify it on ground is important. And that's why, you know, with the programs you're working with GenZero, bringing that learning to people. The people in these communities and a lot of these villages, they do not care the power source they use to cook, right? They will prefer something cleaner. This whole idea that women want to spend 5 hours a day to go and get fuel wood, the first female child probably doesn't go to school because they have to go and get the fuel wood, come back, spend 3 hours cooking is a myth. Okay, it's, you know, it's not the taste of the cooking. If there was an e-solution or a healthier solution, that is the solution they would choose. We have seen, and this is data, this is facts, right? That the numbers show that if you get a better clean cooking solutions using carbon credits, people will not die, right?
Yes.
So we have to understand that like any other technology solutions, like any other finance solution, there has to be some lessons learned. It baffles me, and I'm not a carbon expert, where this is the only kind of sector that's not allowed to fail. There's no lessons learned, there's nothing. Everything is greenwashing as long as something goes wrong. And I think there needs to be a collective effort to say some things will not go right. You know, however, we have to keep on trying to improve it instead of just throwing it away. And in turn, you know, people might die because of it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So, hearing the examples that you have brought out, whether it's genset replacement with clean solutions, whether it is about clean cooking and all that, they belong to a category of projects under reductions or avoidance. So if I turn to Julia and Alex to get your perspectives now, you know, this debate around reductions versus removals have existed for as long as we can remember in this space. Why do you think that debate continues to exist? Why would there be a focus for some of these groups on just removals and sometimes even just engineered carbon removals. And is that because of a preference, a certain catalytic effort that they want to have? Or is that a misunderstanding of the impact that can be achieved if we were to redirect capital towards some of these projects?
Look, I think we all know that we need to do both reductions and removals. We also need a portfolio of solutions, nature-based and engineered. And we need to be doing everything as quickly as possible. So two things I think have been driving focus on one versus the other. One is perceptions of lower quality when there's concerns about, the risk of action in this market is perceived to be higher than the risk of inaction, which is a paradigm we need to shift. To your point, Damilola, we need to be applauding companies who take action today in addition to decarbonizing as quickly as they can, who rely on the latest science and the latest standards and guidance, acknowledging that that will evolve over time. We will learn as we go, but we need to be applauding companies who are taking action based on those latest science and standards. But I think that the concern in the past around the quality perceptions around reductions has kept companies and others from engaging there. That I see there's been a lot of progress, though, in that. And efforts like the ICVCM, the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets, evolving standards with dynamic baselines, et cetera. We know that it's a no-regrets move to support these climate action, and we see that the standards and others are really converging around what does high integrity look like to give companies the incentives to act. I think also there's been a bit of, because of limited demand, maybe a scarcity mindset, right? Of proponents of one project type versus the other, trying to differentiate their solutions and saying we need this and not this, or this is better than this. But actually, we need all of the above. And as I said before, each of these different solutions has a different role to play, has different benefits and different risks to it. Any investment has risks. We know how to mitigate those risks in Symbiosis. We rely on our quality criteria that helps ensure that we take conservative approaches to carbon accounting, that we're focused on integrating the benefits to local people and communities, not just throughout the project, but in the project design. And so we know that we can act now with confidence and mitigate those risks as we go. And actually by promoting and supporting a portfolio of solutions which is aligned with what the climate science tells us we need, we actually broaden the tent for climate action because it gives corporates more opportunities to engage in a way that meets their business case or meets their strategic alignment more as well. So with Symbiosis, we're focused on the removals aspect because we know that there's an ecosystem of actors out there from Leaf Coalition, from Kinetic Coalition, who are focused on different project types, and the nature of nature-based carbon removals is unique from a financing challenge perspective, from a quality perspective, that we want to focus on catalyzing that particular pathway.
But Julia, do you think that sometimes an unintended consequence of having some of the most sophisticated and large buyers in the market focus so much on removals give the wrong impression to other less sophisticated buyers in the market that removals are somewhat better than reductions?
I think that we need to continue to have a message of we need to be doing all of the above, and different buyers have different reasons for engaging in the way that they do, as long as we take an approach that is focused on the latest science and standards, that is guided by the hierarchy of what climate needs us to be solving. And we're clear that in our communication, as we are to say that we need reductions and removals, we need immediate decarbonization in addition to complementary action on carbon markets. We should be enabling corporates to engage in the way that best suits them, and regardless of that pathway, as long as there's that minimum floor of quality and integrity, which, again, as I mentioned, we see so much tremendous progress in the market on that.
Right. So Alex, turning to you. Clearly, SBTi is a very influential voice in guiding buyers of carbon credits on what would be legitimate insofar as their own decarbonization strategy is concerned. how would a SBTI organization look at this issue around reductions and removals, and what kind of advice do you think you would be able to give corporates that could be more inclusive, perhaps a bit more broad-minded around the kind of carbon credits that they can access?
Yeah, thank you. And it's a responsibility that we take very seriously, and clearly it's a complement. These are complementing actions, and I'd actually like to take those two options and extend them further to commodity certificates as well. Yesterday,
yes,
we were in a session talking about SAF certificates, and the airline sector is just one of the sectors where the physical abatement runs up against a wall very quickly. There aren't the infrastructures available, or the investment in place to be able to allow businesses to meet their targets. So we need something else. We need a trading mechanism. That's SAF certificates. There's equivalents of that across steel, aluminium, etc. And those markets need to be pump primed as well. There's been a lot of announcements today already, but if there's space to squeeze in one more, this week the SBTI is actually launching its new strategy on Thursday, and that'll be available on our websites, and our new standard comes shortly after. There's a key shift in that new strategy, and that is that we're creating a lane for those markets. We're creating a lane for carbon credits, and we're creating a lane for commodity certificates. A scheme that was built for 100 companies isn't appropriate for 10,000 or 40% of global market cap, and so we need something that encourages the whole system. There is a hierarchy in there. We still make the point that if you can reduce emissions in your own supply chain, that is the place to be. But we don't want to be pedants about what counts or doesn't count. We simply want to say that as the science-based advisor on this, we need to establish a hierarchy, and we state that, but that anything with very high integrity is allowed to count towards the efforts of businesses, whether that is towards your scope 1, 2, and 3 targets, or going even further to offsetting your ongoing emissions.
And when you look at integrity in the carbon markets, what are some of the simple reference points that you can encourage corporates to look to? I mean, is it a CCP label? Is it rating? Is it a particular project types that have CORSIA eligibility? What exactly would you, in a simple way, advise corporates to think about?
Yeah, well, I think this is an area where there's been the unhelpful fragmentation, a lot of groups in this area, and I was very pleased to see Oxford University produce a report last week saying the systems are starting to come together now. We're starting to see integration. Great. That's what we're trying to do. I'm glad it's being received that way. But ultimately, we will set out a series of very simple principles. It has to be traceable to a producer. It can't be counted twice. You need to be able to have an owner for it. There's a few simple principles like that that are encoded, and schemes that meet those principles are eligible. Again, I'd say the mindset here is market transformation. We're trying to pump prime these markets. Progress over perfection is what we're looking for.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Rachel, if I could turn to you. Now, the UK is playing a leading role in the government coalition on carbon markets, right? And quite clearly in the principles that organizes its thinking around eligibility and so on and so forth, it has deliberately taken a fairly inclusive approach of recognizing both the role of nature as well as engineered solutions, of reductions as well as removals. Could you talk us through a little bit around the thinking behind why you have chosen that kind of an approach to be much more inclusive and open in terms of the eligibility criteria over, say, a symbiosis coalition that focuses purely on removals? Do governments have a different view to this as compared to corporates?
Yes, so obviously from a government point of view, I mean, the reason for the creation of the coalition was that it was very clear that governments needed to do much more to send a clarity to the private sector about the fact that we would want the private sector to engage in the voluntary market. So the demand signals weren't there. The demand was suppressed because of some of the family fights that had gone on around integrity over the last few years, and other sort of acronym squabbling, I think is the polite way to describe it. And so there was a very important role for governments to step in and send a clear signal to their private sectors about what would be expected of them, what would be the parameters, and I think in a number of conversations in a number of different countries, it's and what is the incentive and even perhaps the reward for stepping in now and using the voluntary, embracing the voluntary markets in order to move through the transitions more quickly. So as a set of governments, we're 11 governments at the moment and growing. when each one of us is setting or has set the parameters and the encouragement to the private sector in different ways. Obviously, Singapore is the sort of jewel in the crown with its approach using tax instruments and other instruments to send a very clear signal of what is expected to the Singaporean private sector. We in the UK have gone out for consultation, and we will be later this year coming out with how we will incentivise and provide regularity and clear parameters to our private sector. Other countries are doing different things. A lot of people are waiting to see how SBTI emerges. But at the end of the day, if you're a company, you are going to follow what your government either legislates or what your government recommends. And then voluntary initiatives also provide additional clarity, or if you're working in a jurisdiction where the government has not said or indicated anything, then obviously international voluntary standards help. So I think what we're trying to do is be very clear that the government has a responsibility to nurture and to support companies in their transition pathways. And so what is expected of you, what you will get rewarded for, how we expect you to behave, that is a government responsibility. And perhaps historians will look back at the last 10 years and question why we all left Paris on a high and then didn't put those parameters in place right then. But now we're sort of scrambling to catch up. So I think the other thing is that we need action now. And I think Ali Mohammed and Ravi Menon, my two sort of co-conspirators in leading this coalition, we're very clear that government's responsibility is to signal for action now, not sort of working back from sort of 2035 to see how we go. We really need to change corporate behaviour right now if we're going to hit our 2030 and 2035 targets.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense, Rachel. Now, a question just came in from the audience, and I think Damilola will probably be best placed to address it. No pressure. The question is actually around the fact that given some of the rising fuel prices that have, clearly clean cooking alternatives need to be explored, right? Because the cost of actually some of these fuels is actually going up, LPG and so on and so forth. So the question is really, in your experience, how can we actually accelerate the adoption of alternative clean cooking solutions? You mentioned carbon markets, but is there something else that we need to be aware of?
Okay, for the clean cooking, what we found was that the easiest way to adopt is for especially women in the household to see it being used elsewhere. Okay. So a practical example is that we've been working in Tanzania recently. We've done it in about 35 schools where we've taken what they would have used for their school feeding, which is fuel wood, to e-cooking. This isn't as easy as it sounds. We had to work with the distribution company there to have a tariff for e-cooking. And then we also worked in just literally transforming and creating a kitchen where it was based on e-cooking. It reduced the cost because now people are paying for fuel wood, which is something people don't talk about very much, by about 35%. But it's a cleaner way, and it's a way to have healthier children receiving what many, especially in those communities, is the only meal. So we found that when women have seen this, they have now asked for it in their household. That is what you want. You want people in communities asking for e-cooking solutions instead of the other way around where you're trying to force it. Yeah. So institutional cooking in schools, in health centers, in community settings allows for better adoption of these solutions. But again, you can only provide e-cooking in a home that has electricity in the first place, right? So there's a bigger conversation on how does community cooking work and how does it work in the households. But we've been very, very encouraged about e-cooking, but institutional cooking is what we've been focused on.
Rachel?
Can I add something? Because so we contributed a lot of funding to this kind of experimentation.
Sorry, the UK government funded this project, by the way. I have to say that.
But so we're pleased to see SEforALL taking this institutional support. But I think that there's a call to action here for everybody in the room and outside this room, which is, so we're at this crisis point at the moment where the LPG is stuck in the Strait of Hormuz, and whatever LPG you can get your hands on is at an astronomical price. This is forcing women back to biomass solutions. This is having an impact on their health and having an impact on nature. So is it beyond us as an international community at this moment in time to go to a mass, I don't know, advanced market procurement or a mass procurement or advanced market commitment or purchase for e-stoves and for e-cooking, stimulate the production and manufacturing of these in places like Kenya, where it's already happening but going to scale, stimulating manufacturing of this in India and other places, and then be able to sort of jumpstart these kinds of projects so that we don't just have one pilot in Tanzania, which is going very well, but that we can actually sort of cover the world with e-cooking solutions, because we've learnt at this particular time that LPG is too vulnerable and the supply of new clean cooking is not really at scale yet. So I think that in every crisis, even a horrific war, there is an opportunity. And I think this is the time when we sort of put these ideas together.
And presumably, once we install some of these things, whether it's for solar or other ways of doing it, then there are also benefits beyond cooking subsequently, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And just to Rachel's point, so existing now, we have about 4,000 mini-grids all around the world, in the developed, especially in Africa. To make those mini-grids viable, putting an e-cooking solution makes it more viable because there's a better load at night. So it also helps with the viability of some of these solar plus battery mini-grids that we've already put in place.
Yeah, that makes sense. There is another question that's come in about how we define high-quality credits. So the question goes like, while demand side, integrity is kind of like well understood, or at least better understood with the efforts of people like SBTi and others, most emerging economies are still prioritizing scaling up mature clean tech. So how do you strike a balance? So I guess the question is more around, is there a way in which we can incentivize high-quality credits differently? How does one go about defining it? Is it only about like the most high-end, expensive credits? Can simple technologies also make sense for our transition? Julia, Alex?
Well, I guess I would say that the ICVCM has done a lot of work to help set a minimum threshold for how do you define high quality. And to the point in the video earlier, given that they have done so much work to go through all these different project types in a thorough way, drawing expertise from across the market, I think we should say we have enough confidence to move forward with the variety of methodologies and project types that they've already started to clarify. And as symbiosis, we think about particularly nature-based carbon removal, given that's the area of focus for our coalition, and build on what the ICVCM says to really clarify that for companies who are looking to offtake carbon, that means to support and catalyze the growth of these markets by making these long-term forward commitments that are critical for unlocking finance. We sort of think of what we're doing as doing for nature what power purchase agreements did for the renewable energy sector in terms of de-risking these projects, giving that certainty of demand, certainty of revenue that's needed to unlock the lower cost, larger pools of project finance and capital. We think about the quality from building on the ICVCMs to say that we need conservative carbon accounting, leveraging the latest advances in identifying and evaluating the counterfactual for additionality, mitigating leakage, all these different jargon that we as a carbon community have spent a lot of time to better understand and know how to quantify, and then also engaging indigenous peoples and local communities from the design all the way through the implementation of these projects, not seeing it as a co-benefit. I think too long that it's been viewed as sort of a co-benefit or nice to have, these social benefits of these projects, but actually if you're not engaging local communities and them seeing the benefits of this project in a meaningful way, it's not going to be a project that lasts. It's not going to be a durable, lasting solution. So that contributes to the durability of these projects, which is another critical pillar. And then ecological integrity, so making sure that these projects do no net harm and provide positive biodiversity outcomes. And then finally, the transparency piece, understanding what's working and what's not, being able to be third-party validated. So the pillars that I'm communicating now, they should sound familiar to those in the audience, because it really feels like collectively as a community we've been converging around what does good look like, and it's a matter of being able to have that shared language at the higher level, and then really digging into the nuance at that particular project level to inform these longer-term investments that we'll see have their impact over the coming years and decades to come.
Now, interestingly, there is also a follow-up question that I think is following on that same thread, right? Which is, we talk about the importance of having people participate in both reduction and removal credits. Now, what kind of signals do you think buyers would want to see in order to have the kind of trust in nature or reduction credits to be able to get them to change this paradigm that you're talking about, that we accept both removals and reduction? I mean, what would buyers want to see?
I think it'll be different for different buyers, again, for determining what they are focused on, their goals that they have, their particular strategy. But as Rachel said, I think governments giving confidence and pointing to different standards, giving confidence to engage in these markets, different institutions like SBTI, other standard setters saying that this is part of a high integrity pathway to achieving climate impact, and as well as collectively, and we're seeing more of this, right? Scientists and others, in the community coming together to say that we need both reductions and removals. So we saw earlier this year or last year, 150 scientists from around the world saying that nature is a critical part of climate action and can't be ruled out in SBTI, in Article 6, and various decision-making bodies.
Indeed. IPCC, Paris all acknowledge the role of both reductions and removals. Rachel, you want to add?
Well, just very quickly, Hola Patricia, is that I think that there is more that is needed on the supply side than just integrity. That said, 5 years ago we were in crisis over the question of integrity and growth, and we've solved that. We've got integrity in place, and growth will therefore start coming. And a large part of that is provided by ICVCM, which I think the whole world has sort of gotten behind, and you start to see the convergence now between the different registries, etc. So I think that's come together, but there is more that can be done to shore up the quality on the supply side, and I think that's where government have got a role, but also the predominance of good actors, I think, on the private sector. So I think that it's a good question that deserves its own panel, but I think we've solved more or less for integrity, and now we have other elements to take into account on the supply side, and then on the demand side, we've still got much to do.
Very good. So as we are coming towards the end of the panel, if I could just ask all of you to perhaps share with us, if we had the ability to address one of these false choices, these binaries that act as a barrier for us to actually accelerate momentum, either on climate solutions or on drawing finance into the space, what would that be? Maybe Alex, I'll go to you, and then we can come all the way back to Damilola.
Yeah, that's right. Look, I think the unlock of business action on climate change, accelerating that through strong action from corporates that's facilitated by policymakers and the wider consumer community is what's needed. That'll be in place if all of the institutions in this space are singing off the same hymn sheet, and if there's clarity. And I think importantly, and to link to that previous discussion, if there's money to be made, these are commodity markets at the end of the day. Credits are a commodity. The certificates we were talking about yesterday, that is also a commodity. And so the signal has to be there that these actions are profitable over the medium term for there to be strong action.
Great. Julia?
I would say this false choice that we either focus on internal decarbonization or support these beyond value chain actions. We know that the world needs both, and that corporates can do everything they can to decarbonize, and yet we still won't be going fast enough to solve the climate challenge. So we need to support action on both. We know enough today to act. The science is unequivocal. We have the standards and the integrity. We can look at a project-by-project project basis to understand what are the specific project risks through rigorous diligence, mitigate those risks through project design, through contractual mitigants. Increasingly, we have the financial mechanisms to also address those risks. So I would say that we can act with confidence in the carbon market. Yes, we will learn as we go. There will be projects that work tremendously and projects that won't. But we need to have collectively a learning mindset and praise those companies who are taking action based on the latest science and standards and sharing lessons learned along the way.
Great.
I think there's this fundamental issue of justice. You know, the North, you know, denuded the planet for the last 200 or more years and intervened, you know, perniciously in the quality of our own nature and continues to interrupt natural processes in the global south through economic models. But then suddenly when we have the opportunity to use economic models and markets to do good for the nature that still is there and the nature that we all need in order to be resilient and to survive, we suddenly get very sort of hysterical and grab our pearls and scream. And it's like, no, you know, ladies and gentlemen, we can intervene for good in nature in a positive way and in our atmosphere eventually in a positive way. We are in an overshoot world and we're just going to have to come to terms with that because at the end of the day it's about justice.
Thank you. Damilola?
I think, obviously Rachel said it all, but I think just very practical things like, you know, MRV systems on ground in African continents, just showing people how to actually do this stuff instead of just saying, I want you to be part of the carbon market. Educating government, educating private sector, having streamlined some of the things. It just seems to be a lot of ways to get around something that should be just simplified. So a simplified way and rules that we all agree on could be very good. And then finally, not making it seem like if a project fails, everybody, all the actors were bad. Things just fail sometimes, and we have to recognize that and learn from these things.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for helping us to unpack this question around going beyond binaries, to be able to reframe the way that we think about the necessary climate solutions and to break down the barriers and the stovepipes that we have when we approach climate solutions. I can't think of really a better way to kickstart an entire conference that focuses on going beyond binary choices and false binaries. So please, guys, please join me in thanking the panel for a wonderful session.